The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus spoke this parable to the disciples. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out again at about 9 o'clock, he saw some laborers standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you what is right." So they went. When he went out again, and at about noon, and at about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And at about 5 o'clock, he went out again and found others standing around. And he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day long?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." When those hired at about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now, when the first ones who were hired came, they thought they will receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But the owner of the vineyard replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. The Gospel of the Lord. Today we celebrate the feast day of St. Pius, Pope Pius X. The church celebrates Pope Pius X and is so greatly loved. Like I said, he was the Pope in the early 1900s. He was elected Pope in 1903. After he was elected Pope, the first thing he did was to reduce the age for receiving Holy Communion. As we all know, in the Catholic Church, it used to be that there were so many barriers to receiving Holy Communion. And so Pope Pius X brought down the age for receiving Holy Communion to what is today called the Age of Reason. Pope Pius said Jesus wants everybody to receive Holy Communion unless something spectacular happens in anybody's life that excommunicates the person. So the Pope also changed the rule of the fasting. It used to be that one could not receive communion for 24 hours of fasting before you can receive communion, meaning after supper, you have to wait and fast until after morning mass the next day before you can eat again. And Pope Pius relaxed those rules. He is called the Pope of the Eucharist because he did so much to make people come to receive Holy Communion. Another spectacular thing that Pope Pius X did was he was the first to start calling out the unfair treatment on the indigenous people, especially the indigenous people in the country called Peru, in the mountains of Peru. He called out on the world to see the plight of the indigenous people and to help them. So today we ask for his intercession. We ask Pope Pius to help us love Jesus, to help us have the ardent desire to approach Jesus in the body and blood of Christ. Our gospel reading today is from Matthew chapter 20, starting from verse 1. And this parable is called the parable of the laborers who were called to go to the vineyard. You will notice that everybody that went to the vineyard was called. And they were all called at different times. And we say, what is the spiritual symbolism of this calling? What does it mean to go into the vineyard? I'm sure we have heard different interpretations, but I want to share with us today the interpretation that the fathers of the church, especially two fathers of the church, I want to share with us the first interpretation from Saint Irenaeus of Lyons. Saint Irenaeus of Lyons talks about the 5 epochs. He's talking about salvation for the 5 epochs of biblical history. And so he says, the first people that were called very early in the morning represented the people that lived from the time of the children of Adam and Eve, Abel, until the time of Noah. That was one epoch. And he said the second group of people that were called at 9 o'clock and at noon represented the people that lived from the time of Abraham, the time of Isaac, and the time of Jacob. And the third group of people that were called at noon were the people that lived in the time of Moses, Aaron, and Joshua. And then the fourth group of people, he says, were the time of the Hebrew prophets, people that lived there. And then the landowner went out at 5 p.m. and still found people waiting, and they called them and he says, that's us, Christians of today. And he says, these people represented the 5 epochs. Now that's Saint Irenaeus, and Origen also agreed with that interpretation. But St. Augustine agreed with Irenaeus, but then he went further and he says the 5 epochs represent the 5 different epochs of the human life. And so he says the people that were called very early in the morning represents infants, babies. And he says the second group of people who were called at 9 o'clock were children. And then the next group who were called at noon were adolescents, the youths. And then the people who were called later represents people who are adults. And then the last group were people who were called at old age. And St. Augustine says, what is important is for everybody to be ready, because we do not know when the owner of the vineyard is going to show up to call us, either as infants, babies, young people, youth, adults, or in old age. The owner of the vineyard is going to call, and we have to be ready for God's call. And he says, why will the landowner go out in the last hour? He went out at 5 p.m. You can understand that people will work 8 days shift, 8 hours shift, 5 hours shift. But why will somebody still be standing hoping to be hired at 5 when the work day ends at 6? St. Augustine says to continue to be ready. And the landowner showed up at the last hour. And so he quotes Luke's Gospel. He quotes Luke's Gospel chapter 19, verse 10, when Jesus says, I came to seek out the lost. So God in his mercy is always searching for us. And we have to allow ourselves to be found. You know, our responsorial psalm talks about the Lord is my shepherd. The shepherd, where the sheep must allow itself to be found, to be able to receive good treatment from the good shepherd. And then, in conclusion, talking about the pay. You see, God is not a God of injustice. He says, in heaven, everybody will receive equal pay. It is not as if some people will be in air-conditioned room and some people will be in a room with small windows. He says everybody will be justified. So the people that questioned were the people who felt like, look, I worked hard for you. You should put me in a mansion. Why will I be in the same state with these people who didn't do much for you? And God says, I'm generous. I'm good to people. Enjoy heaven. Enjoy what I have provided for you. That is a blessing for you. So, my dear people, God calls all of us. And like all the workers, they responded. They did not make excuses not to go into the vineyard. All of us should be ready also when we are called.